The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, is Canada's democracy in crisis? The Globe and Mail's Andrew Coyne thinks so, and he'll be here to tell us why. Then, Nan Kiwanuka speaks to the youngest poet ever to win CBC's Poetry Prize. That's all ahead on The Agenda. How solid is our democracy in Canada? Well, according to our guest tonight, we may have one in name only. From unaccountable leaders to disempowered MPs, to what extent have our democratic institutions become increasingly undemocratic? Andrew Coyne explores these issues in his latest book. It's called The Crisis of Canadian Democracy. And the Globe and Mail columnist joins us now for more. Let's do an excerpt from the book. Sheldon, if you would, bring this graphic up and we'll get started. Here's Andrew Coyne. Far from a democratic example to the world, our parliamentary system is in a state of advanced disrepair. So advanced, it is debatable whether it should still be called a democracy. Put simply, we do not live in the system we think we do. We have the form of a democracy, but not the substance. The rituals, but not the reality. Because we preserve the forms and rituals, people find it hard to accept how far the substance has been eaten away. But at some point, the facts become unanswerable. Every chapter of your book is basically, putting a different aspect of our democracy under the microscope. So let's take our time and go through, subject by subject by subject, the things that you find particularly egregious. And I like the question you asked fairly close to the beginning, which is, what if we had a parliament that mattered? Yeah. What doesn't matter about our parliament today that we need to fix?
Well, virtually everything. When we think about what we send MPs to do to Parliament, what do we think? Well, we think they're going to propose legislation. We think they're going to debate legislation. They're going to scrutinize it carefully, make amendments, and ultimately they're going to vote on it. And when they do all these things, they're going to be representing us in our rights. That's, I think, when we're thinking good thoughts about our democracy, that's what we think they're going to do. Well, go through each of them in turn. MPs don't propose legislation. The number of private members' bills that get through in a year is maybe 2 or 3 in a given year. Most MPs will never pass one at all. Scrutinize legislation. Well, yeah, that's great, but when you have bills coming through in these omnibus bills with dozens of separate pieces of legislation yoked together into one thing where they have to vote up or down them at all, very little actual scrutiny relevant to the size of the package actually goes on. Sometimes they get passed in a few days. So that is increasingly, a misnomer. Voting on legislation, we have the tightest system of party discipline in the democratic world. The Samara Center did a study. They found MPs vote with their party 99.6% of the time.
And even the biggest mavericks.
The biggest mavericks, maybe 2 or 3%, and there's only a couple of them.
That they're offside with the party.
They're offside with their party. And of course, as experts will tell you, it's not even about voting discipline anymore. It's about message discipline. So even the idea of MPs standing up and asking questions in the House or making statements in the House, they only do so if they are approved by the party leadership to ask those questions, to make those statements. As often as not, they're written for them. These days, everything they say publicly is written for them. Their tweets are written for them. So all the things that we think we send MPs to do, they're not really doing.
So let's come back to the question. What if we had a parliament that mattered? How would our lives be better?
Well, why do we have a problem? Why do we send people to Ottawa to hold governments to account, to call them out when they have either put bad legislation forward or misbehaved or their employees have done so? Again, we have very little ability to do so. We've had scandal after scandal under both the Liberals and the Conservatives over the last 10, 20 years where essentially nothing happened. We had the Mike Duffy thing. No real price was paid by anybody in government by that. We had the S&C lab one. We had the We Charity. We had all these things, one after another, where the committees that were supposed to look at these things were basically stonewalled, couldn't even get the documents they were demanding. And if there's one ancient power parliament that everyone agrees is undoubted, it's the right to demand documents. Well, apparently governments can get away with just telling them we're not giving them to you. So those are some of the functions, but ultimately it's to decide whether or not the government has the confidence of the House. You cannot Under our system, you're not supposed to be able to govern unless you have the support of the majority of the members of the House. We've seen governments even get away with basically ignoring the confidence House. Either there have been actual votes that scholars will say were confidence votes, as with Paul Martin in 2005, where they just kind of hum and haw and spend a few days trolling for votes on the opposition benches so they can get somebody to cross over. Which they got in the end.
Belinda Stronach.
Or what we've seen under both the Harper and the Trudeau governments, you prorogue when you look like you're about to lose a confidence vote. Proroguing in itself is not a scandal, but if you're using prorogation to basically escape accountability to Parliament, something's seriously wrong.
We are not even 6 months into this year, and we've had, in the province of Ontario anyway, 2 general elections already, a provincial and a federal. Do we not have free and fair elections in this province and country?
We do, and so some of the, by some standards, we do very well. Our paper balloting system proves its worth time and time again. There's no funny business. It's hard. You can't game it. You can't scam it. You can't hack it. Nobody is prevented from voting by physical force or fraud, all these sort of baseline things. But we need to ask, how representative is the Parliament that elects? We've talked about the degree to which it can't represent us in a rise, but how representative of us even in totality? The parliaments that we elect look nothing like what we voted for, whether in the aggregate or at the sub-regional level. So, for example, the Liberals were having a big to-do now about potential separatist uprising in Alberta because, my goodness, we elected the Liberals again and nobody votes for the Liberals in Alberta. Well, actually 30% or close to 30% of the public voted for the Liberals in Alberta this time.
And got 2 seats to show for it.
Best they've done since 1968 in the popular vote, they got 2 seats. This happens time and time again. It creates this absolutely distorted picture of who we are as a country. It exacerbates and exaggerates our differences. I mean, I think it is fair to say, I'll be a critic here, that the Liberals have, over the years have not shown a lot of attunement to the concerns and interests of Alberta. If you're a Liberal, you say, well, why should we? We can't win any seats there. Or you could flip around, or even more cynically, and say, we don't need to win any seats there. We've already racked up our majority in Ontario and Quebec by the same process of distortion flipped on its head, where you get 30 or 40% of the vote and you rack up 80% of the seats. If we had an electoral system where it was more, use that word, proportional, and by that, in particularly this context, I mean where you could win seats in Alberta in proportion to the number of votes you got. Therefore, parties could win seats in all parts of the countries, and all parties had to win seats in all parts of the country. Then we'd have actual national politics, which we don't have now. What we have in our elections is a series of regional elections contested by basically regional parties. The Liberals have not won a majority of the seats in Western Canada since 1949. The Conservatives have only won Quebec 3 times since 1887. So we do not have national parties in this country, at least in terms of the representation in the House.
So if we had better representation, you'd see Liberals being elected in Alberta, you'd see more Conservatives being elected in Quebec.
You'd have more Conservatives in the big cities. You'd have more Liberals in rural Canada. So these divides that, again, they're real enough. There's actual existing divisions that matter, but they wouldn't be so stark and so exaggerated. And again, parties would have an interest in bridging those divides rather than making them worse.
Now, as you know, I mean, you've written probably dozens of columns on this kind of thing. We've done probably dozens of shows here on this kind of thing. The trouble is getting people to come to some kind of a consensus on how we ought to change our winner-take-all, first-past-the-post to something that, as you say, is more proportionate. Yeah. What do you like? What system do you like?
Well, the one I prefer is the one that British Columbians voted 58% in favor of in the first referendum, which is a remarkable result.
But not enough.
It's because the government that won, I think, 43% of the vote set the bar at 60%. So they had 2 bars. Remember, they had to win a majority in a majority of the ridings. I believe they won it in 75 of the ridings, but they didn't get the 60% overall. 58%, though, in this country where we're so averse to major changes, is remarkable. And that system was basically combined multi-member ridings, which is the thing that is germane to all proportional systems, is you have multi-member ridings. Why is that? Because what makes our system disproportional is it's only 1 member per riding, as you said, winner take all. So you get 30% of the vote, let's say, but you get all of the representation, and the other 70% basically go unrepresented. I know that you are, as their MPs, legally and politically and morally their representative, but their views aren't being represented. And if their views didn't matter, we wouldn't have elections. So so it combines multi-member ridings, so therefore you can spread the representation. If you get 20% of the vote in a riding and there's 5 MPs, you get one of those 5 MPs. If you get 40%, you get 2, and so on. And the other thing is they use a transferable vote, a ranked ballot. And you combine the two. Sometimes people talk about ranked ballots as if that were a reform, but that's basically still winner take all. It's just a little less. You still have to get like a 50% of the vote, but you're still leaving 50% unrepresented. That's called the single transferable vote. It's the system in place in Ireland, in Malta, in the Scottish Parliament. I think in the Australian Senate, it's proved its worth. It's the simplest to explain, I find. The other contender that we looked at in Ontario a few years back is the mixed member thing, where you elect half the MPs the way we do now and half by proportional representation from party lists. I find, even though I think lists are misunderstood, people think they're manipulated and controlled by the party brass. They're usually not. They're usually open to the voters to decide who gets in off them. But people in this country don't like the sounds of lists, and I don't think they really like the idea of these two different types of representative. So for my purposes, I find the single transferable vote much easier to explain. It was certainly easy enough to explain to British Columbians. Will it happen? What may happen is we bring in ranked ballots first, and then we add multi-member ridings later.
Well, here's the trouble. We had, at the municipal level, in a few municipalities in Ontario, more than 7 years ago, we had the opportunity to have that ranked ballot opportunity at election time. Doug Ford's party won the election in 2018. He came in, canceled all that stuff.
Yep.
So we're not moving towards the Jerusalem you want to see. We're actually moving further away from it.
Well, this is the problem, of course, with all of these reforms and all of these problems is the only way you can change the system, whether you're talking about the electoral system, whether you're talking about the powers of the prime minister, et cetera, is if the people in power who got in under the current system agree to change them. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That's the problem facing any time you're making systemic change, but it does make it hard. I think one of the things that's impeded us from change is whenever the issue arises, I think it's getting better. There's more education. People understand these things a lot better than they did 10, 20 years ago, but it does tend to be a vote on whether you want to live in Canada. All right, you can paint any change as being some ghastly foreign thing that has never been done anywhere else.
You want a pizza parliament like they have in Italy? You want what they've got in Israel?
That's one of the things. People think they know about proportional representation because they've heard a couple of horror stories. They don't know, for example, that more than 90% of the countries around the world use it, that the most successful countries by every standard, social development, fiscal integrity, economic growth, et cetera, most of them are proportional representation countries. They just think about Israel, et cetera.
Well, but the argument I've heard, and oh my gosh, I got to do fast math here. 1867, 2025. What are we? 158? 158 years old. We've had first past the post for 158 years. Not exactly what we have today, but pretty much what we've had today, and we're one of the greatest countries in the world by all measures. Yeah, so why change?
Well, that's right. So the question becomes, are we that way because of our system or in spite of it? We've also had a system, as I say, where we've been teetering on the verge of national disintegration at various times because of the electoral system. We have a system, you can outline all the deficiencies of first past the post, and people will nod their heads because they're familiar with it. They're familiar with the phenomenon of safe ridings, where it just doesn't matter whether you vote or not. The parties don't even bother to campaign there because it's a foregone conclusion. That's first past the post. They're familiar with these regional ghettos where it's only Tories in Western Canada, people know about this. They know about this. God knows they know about the dilemma of strategic voting, because this comes up in every election. One of the bedrock principles of democracy is supposed to be you get to vote for the party of your choice. Every election, voters are told, no, you can't vote for the party you actually like. You have to vote for another party that you don't really like so you can keep a party you hate from getting it.
That's right.
So people, when you talk specifics to people, this is the thing. We're so invested in this idea that we're Canada, we're great, and we are. We're successful by so many measures. But it can blind us to things that we know are true when we get past the idea of isn't Canada great. When we actually look at, there's things about our democracy that we know don't work. Let's get over this idea that any change means you don't live in Canada anymore and start fixing them.
You and I are both old enough to remember that there was a time in this country when prime ministers tasked their ministers with running their own departments. Right. And the prime minister obviously got involved on the big issues of the day, but he essentially left the day-to-day business to the ministers to run their ministries. Okay, we just saw a new cabinet sworn in last week. How much of that is going to go on in this government?
Very little, I would think. We'll see. I mean, obviously, every prime minister is new, but every prime minister from both parties has come in promising some version of free votes and cabinet government, and it never happens. In fact, I think experts would agree, with each successive government, the system gets more control from the center, including the tightness of the reins on the caucus, but even including the cabinet. Part of the function of that, as I document in the book, is how enormously the cabinet has grown. In the great days of cabinet government, under Lester Pearson, under Mackenzie King, under Dave Maker, et cetera, cabinets were much, much smaller than they were now. You have a small cabinet, each one of them is a player. When you get cabinets of close to 40 members, one of the things I noticed is you can't find a picture of the meeting. You cannot find a picture of the Canadian cabinet in session.
Yeah.
You can find the Italian, the French, the German, the British cabinets. And the British cabinet, which is about 22 members, you look at a picture of that, it's a pretty unwieldy looking group, but they can just manage it. 40, I'm told, in fact, that there's a timer on them. You're given 30 seconds to make your point. People who've looked at this closely, and I've talked to people who've been in the room, I've talked to people who've studied it closely, the meetings are basically just to, maybe they're giving the prime minister some feedback, some sounding board. Donald Savoy famously called it the focus group for the prime minister. But it's basically to look at questions that are going to be decided by the prime minister and his staff, maybe with the finance minister, but one or two other ministers. But most of them are there just to either provide some feedback or to be spokespersons. They're not running their own departments. That's clear. The deputy ministers are doing that. They're not even really setting policy for their departments. That's mostly decided by the center. That's why you see these mandate letters that they're all issued now, where their job is to see that the policy is enacted. So yes, send the deputy minister to get it done. But mostly it's to publicize it, to promote it. And that's what most of them are selected. It's a combination of being spokespersons and being representative. So we've decided that the task of cabinet is not to govern the country, it's to represent the country, which I thought was the job of Parliament. But we look, and you can see it with this cabinet shuffle we've just gone through. The first reaction after every cabinet is, why weren't there any ministers from southwestern Ontario? Why aren't there enough from Calgary? Why aren't there enough of this or that demographic group? We've learned that the individual cabinet ministers, their experience, talents, views, et cetera, which are the focus in other countries. That's how cabinets are analyzed in other countries, is what does this mean about where the government's going ideologically? Is this person capable of this job, or has he been over-promoted? Does this person bring a new viewpoint? In our country, it's strictly analyzed through the lens of representation. Don't get me wrong, representation is part of it. We've just taken it to such an exaggerated degree. And that's how you get cabinets of 39 members, because that's the only way you can make the numbers work in terms of representation.
The previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, appointed the chiefs of staff to all of the cabinet ministers. What do we think of that?
I can't find any example of this in other countries. In fact, I've seen examples, the famous case in Britain where the Boris Johnson government tried to appoint the staff of their Chancellor of the Exchequer, who promptly resigned on the spot, saying no self-respecting minister would accept this. In Canada, it didn't totally start with Justin Trudeau. It's been sort of being phased in. The PMO has been getting more and more of its hands into, but by now it is very clear that all of their chiefs of staff are chosen for them. And what does that mean? It means this person with whom you're supposed to have the closest working relationship, the person you're supposed to trust with your life, is not accountable to you, is not working for you, is working for the Prime Minister. It's basically your minder.
A spy for the Prime Minister.
It's putting it strongly, but yeah. So it's both a symptom of and an indicator, a part of this system of centralized control of even cabinet ministers. And you see it, of course, in these memoirs from important, you would think, ministers. The finance minister, Bill Morneau, the justice minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former foreign affairs minister, Mark Garneau. And what runs through all the memoirs is, I had no input. I couldn't even get the prime minister to take my calls.
Couldn't get a meeting. That's
couldn't
right.
Couldn't get a meeting.
Yeah. Kind of extraordinary.
These are, and if that's what ministers of that rank and status are complaining of, God knows what the minister of amateur sport is dealing with.
One of the things that I was going to say harp on. Harp is not the right word, but you're really ticked off about. Yeah, the apparent lack of power that all ordinary, quote unquote, members of Parliament have nowadays. I want to push back on you a little bit on this. The Conservative caucus has chosen to follow the Reform Act, I guess they call it, in which they have a lot of power to get rid of their leader if they don't like the leader, and they did that to Aaron O'Toole. The Liberal caucus has never signed on to that, and yet they did a pretty good job getting rid of Justin Trudeau. You're not sure, right? You're saying, I mean, eventually.
Yeah, eventually. Eventually, Jean Chrétien was pushed out.
Right.
These are extremely rare, first of all. Those are about the only two examples you can think of.
So
you have to go back to Mackenzie.
Do they
Polk.
have more power than we think they have?
They ultimately have power, but I think that the contrast between those two cases is very interesting, between Aaron O'Toole and Justin Trudeau. Because the Conservatives availed themselves of this power under the Reform Act, which was the system that we had for the first few decades of our existence, that the caucus chose the leader. We still don't have that, by the way. Even under the Reform Act, they have the power to remove the leader, but not to choose a new one, which means it's a huge impediment to actually removing the leader, because you know that if you do, you're not ensuring a quick succession. You're condemning your party to the next several months of internal fighting and fundraising and everything else while they wait to elect a new leader by the cumbersome method that we've chosen. But nevertheless, Aaron O'Toole was removed within the space of 2 days. Justin Trudeau, it took them 2 years. Right? Yeah. This is the difference. Because there's no rules, there's no ground rules, there's no standard of what level of support do you need to bring down the leader, et cetera, then everything is done in the shadows. And no one wants to be the first to put their head above the parapet. And you could see that with Justin Trudeau's last days. They wouldn't even sign the letter.
But Andrew, again, the first guy who picked his head up over the parapet, he's in the new cabinet of Mark Carney.
He is. But
That's Wayne Long from New Brunswick.
But Wayne Long was going to resign.
Yes, he was.
The reason he spoke up was, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Nobody who was planning on running again spoke up.
Fair
they
point.
had a letter that was supposedly 2 dozen had signed. None of the signatures, was it written on invisible ink? None of the signatures appeared on the document. So that's the thing, is the party leader has so much power, not just prime ministers, but party leaders vis-a-vis their caucus members, that it's very difficult for them to summon up the nerve and gather together to take them on. And flip that around, of course, not only does the caucus not have the power to choose the leader effectively chooses the caucus. He chooses them because most of them, again, Samara Center looked into this. We think nominees, candidates, are chosen by their local riding associations in competitive elections. In over half the cases in recent elections, they were appointed, averaging across the parties. Of those that remained, most of them were elected by acclamation. They ran unopposed, usually because everybody knew who had the party leads. In the races that were contested, as often as not, there was some kind of shenanigans where the organizers had put their thumb on the scales in terms of when was the nomination meeting, how long was the race, et cetera, and people would find out a day before. And even in the openly contested races, how are they settled? By busloads of instant members whose memberships have been bought, with all the potential for interference we've now seen by foreign entities. So that whole thing is a mess. But the final thing is, even if you get through that gauntlet, you cannot run. Even if you're a sitting MP, you cannot run again unless the leader approves your nomination. So you put that plus the caucus doesn't choose the leader is essentially unaccountable to anybody. It really alters the relationship, the power relationship between the leader and the caucus, and that's why we have such powerless caucuses.
Let's talk about the Senate. You and I have both, I think it's fair to say, met some people who are senators who are very fine people.
Yes.
Who actually are people of quality. They're people of talent. They are working in a system, well, I'll leave it to you. You don't like what we've got right now? What would you do with it?
Well, in an ideal world, I think there's a place for an upper house that would represent the regions. I mean, I'm from Western Canada, and I understand the argument that says we need something to temper the power of the populous centers. We're never going to get, I don't think, to an elected Senate that can do that. There's just too many constitutional, legal obstacles. It's hard to get consensus on what kind of model. What we can't have, in my view, is the system we had, first of all, in the past, which, yes, there were some fine people, but there were a lot of partisan appointments in there. That, again, doesn't have to be the case. One of the things I looked into was the record of the House of Lords in Britain versus in Canada. House of Lords, basically around half the appointments since 1958 could be said to be partisan appointments where the Prime Minister picked a party that, you know...
His chief fundraiser.
Exactly. Well, or just, yeah, exactly, just same party. In Canada, it was like 99%. So it's always been a very partisan body, and it's just hard to justify anything. Justin Trudeau supposedly brought in these reforms where they'll be nonpartisan. First of all, it's not really, if you look at it.
They're less partisan.
They're less partisan, let's say. I think they got increasingly capital L liberal towards the end, but they were always small L liberal. They were always reliably progressive. And And the problem is, if senators were previously deterred from voting against the House of Commons because, well, we're not elected, who are we? And to some extent that held. Even then, they've been a little friskier than people might imagine. But it was clear that once you decided that they were not partisan appointments, but they were chosen on the basis of their personal virtues, a lot of them shed their inhibitions. And there was a period there in the early years of the Trudeau government when there were a lot of conservative holdovers, when the Senate was looking like it might start voting down Commons legislation. That passed. Why? Because Justin Trudeau filled the House with his own appointees, the Senate with his own appointees, to an extent unrivaled in Canadian history, by the way. So they're now like 90% either Trudeau or Chrétien appointees. But if we get a conservative government in the next few years, we're already seeing signs that there could be a real confrontation. And I think that's a huge thing. So my answer to it is, and this is not original to me, but it's been proposed by some former senators, is the Senate has the power within itself to solve the basic problem, which is we cannot have a Senate, an unelected Senate, defeating a legislation passed by the House of Commons. And their answer is just pass a resolution of the standing orders of the Senate saying words to the effect of, if a bill from the Commons is not passed within 6 months, it shall be deemed to have passed. So you get a 6-month suspensive veto. You can use that to embarrass the government, to point out the defects in the legislation, et cetera, maybe win the battle of public opinion, but you don't get to defeat legislation. That, to me, it could actually be a quite tolerable model. If we got a Senate that was genuinely nonpartisan appointments, the great and the good, people of great standing in the community, who people respected, who had moral authority, their verdict could be powerful and could be worthwhile assembling a group like that, as long as at the end of the day it's moral authority and not legislative authority.
Let me ask you about television. We live in a day and age when everything is on television. You don't like television in our legislatures or in the House of Commons. You can't get the cameras out at this stage, can you?
No. I used to be more of a fan. I think I've had a bit of a rethink, partly in the age of social media, where so much of it is not directed. You're not even speaking to your fellow members of Parliament. You're not speaking to the viewing public. You're just assembling clips that somebody can manipulate to make your side look good and the other side look bad. But I think there's two things wrong with it right now. One is just in principle. I think something was lost when the world that you were addressing as an MP was no longer the world of the House of Commons, where it was your fellow MPs, it was the assembled press, it was people who respected and understood Parliament, understood its traditions, et cetera, and there was a certain power that went with that, and I think it meant, I think people felt a certain sense of solemnity and importance to what they were doing as a result of that. Once the cameras intrude and realize, oh, we're just some little house somewhere that nobody's really paying attention to, or if they are, then we kind of look insignificant. I think it actually shrank the view of the House of Commons in a lot of ways. The other problem is we don't actually get a real view of the House of Commons. We look at it through a straw.
It's video enhanced.
And that's right. But other legislators have different rules. If you watch the British Parliament, they have cutaway shots. They have reaction shots. And I think you get, and obviously you want to be careful how you do this, but I think that if we're going to let the cameras in, we should let them all the way in. I think that would make it more realistic.
Lying. Let's talk about lying in politics. To that end, Sheldon, top of page 3, let's bring this excerpt of the book up if we can. Lying to the public has become an accepted stratagem in Canadian politics, all part of the game, like fighting in hockey. The greatest penalty any politician expects to pay is to be thrown from office at the next election when he or she may hope tempers have cooled and the facts have been forgotten. This is not Trump-style lying. These are lies that are plainly intended to be believed. But through sheer repetition, they have had the same result. We've been burned so often with such mounting shamelessness that we now assume they're all lying. This erosion of truth, not Trump-style lying, as you point out, which is just a whole other quality and quantity, thankfully we don't quite experience in this country yet. But the erosion of truth that you're talking about has had what impact on our political life?
I think it's corroded trust in politicians when you ask people why they don't vote, which is another problem. We blipped up in this election because of the crisis that was going on, but generally there's a secular decline in turnout at all levels of government in Canada, and you ask people, well, they're all liars. It's easy to dismiss that as just populist, anti-politician rabble-rousing, et cetera. But if you look at the actual record, going back several decades, it's been absolutely shameless. I don't mean stray slips of the lip or a little colorful rhetoric, exaggeration, that blarney, the kinds of things we associate with politicians, and that's, maybe part of the game. I mean down and dirty, flat out promises on central parts of your campaign platform that the first thing you do once you get in the office is you repudiate them. Going back to, Pierre Trudeau with the zap your frozen on wage and price controls. Or Brian Mulroney, attacking free trade as a candidate, leadership candidate, and then bringing it in when he came in. Or Jean Chrétien saying we're going to get rid of the GST, we're going to renegotiate NAFTA, et cetera, not doing any of those. Or Stephen Harper on income trusts, and the list is long.
There's no shortage. Trudeau.
Yeah. So the point I'm making is it's not just little slips of the lip. It's not populist cynicism. It's their track record has been on such a scale that you start to say, well, why should we accept this? We don't accept this in private life. The consequence in public life is, of course, that the people who are telling the truth now have no way to establish their bona fides, right? Maybe they really mean it, but people are going, yeah, we heard this one. So bad politics is driving out good. We're handicapping the honest politicians by doing this. So one of the things I propose, and I've talked about this before, is something you might call a Truth in Politics Act. I don't think you want to have, a flat ban on lying. That'd be very hard to police, and, you don't want truth squads trailing people. What I think you want, borrowing from our private sector experience, is a way for politicians to opt into it, the same way you do when you offer a bonded courier, or you swear an oath, or you give a money-back guarantee. You choose, in your own interests, to assume consequences if what you're saying is not true. Is it so inconceivable that we could design something in political life where a political party, let's say, releasing their platform, could say, releasing our platform, we invoke Article 12 of the Elections Act, and Article 12 would spell out what the consequence would be if they were, in fact, did not uphold what they had said they would do. Very clearly, politicians would hedge, would make sure that the promises were contingent and conditional. That's fine. I don't mind at all if a party says, we're going to balance the budget subject to these conditions. That's an honest, reasonable, practical, adult thing to promise. But at the end of the day, if those conditions are met, you got to live up to your promise.
Yeah, but... Okay, I'm going to give an Ontario example here. I well remember the Mike Harris government 30 years ago passing a law that said, if you ever want to raise taxes in the future, you're going to have a referendum, and the people are going to have to give you the green light to do so. And then later in that same progressive conservative, might have been Ernie Eves who had come in at that point, Premier Eves said, okay, we got to raise taxes, and I'm going to pass a little loophole to this law saying I actually don't have to have the referendum after all.
And then Dalton McGuinty did the same thing?
He did the same thing on the Taxpayer Protection Act, or whatever it was called. So I guess I say nice idea, but in practical terms, can it ever really happen?
Well, this is true of a lot of things where we try to constrain the discretion of lawmakers. But the whole project of law is to constrain the discretion of lawmakers. That's what the Constitution is about. That's what the Charter is about. And there's a whole thing in the book about that. So ultimately, there's only so far, short of a constitutional constraint, there's only so far you can constrain a parliament. But the act of passing the legislation, the act of then having to unpass it, there's at least an embarrassment factor. So yeah, we could pass a Truth in Politics Act and the next government could revoke it. I'm clear on that. But at least the act of discussing, debating it, and sometimes what happens is these things don't get revoked at the next annual. They become part of the convention. They become sanctioned by usage in history, and they become such a taboo on overturning them that they stick. So that's the best you can hope for any of these things, is you essentially over time it becomes part of the written law becomes part of the unwritten consensus.
I got to the end of the book, and I thought to myself, he's got some great ideas in here, and these really should be pursued. And then I read where you said, yeah, but of course the problem is that everybody who's elected today who potentially could do something about this has benefited from the status quo, and therefore none of this will ever happen. So why should we not be totally depressed at the state of affairs?
Well, there's two possibilities. One, and we talked a little bit about the impact of the Reform Act. When Aaron O'Toole was tossed out, that was a watershed moment. That put a lot, and it was significant that the Conservative caucus, even under Pierre Poilievre, who's exercised a lot of control until now, voted to retain that power. And Mr. Poilievre is sounding a little more consensual these days with his caucus members. So it's possible you can get incremental change over time. And just as right now we're trapped in all these vicious circles where the less powerful Parliament is, the less anybody cares about how powerful Parliament is, et cetera. If you can get small changes happening, you can start turning those into virtuous circles. If you start empowering MPs, maybe they'll start to look at some of these other ways to empower themselves. That's one answer. The other is we get ourselves into some monster crisis. And it's obviously not what I would hope, but we are getting the situation now in this country. We've got enormous changes that we're going to have to make in the next few years. Everybody agrees on defense, on the economy, on trade, dealing with Donald Trump, dealing with this entirely changed relationship with the United States. I greatly fear that under our existing system where governments get in with 40% of the vote or less, most of which is from one section of the country or another, that they then use to ram home large changes that the rest of the country might find repugnant. I worry that we're going to really strain the fabric in Confederation. It may be that we get to a point where we're really either hamstrung or deadlocked or in a state of division, and people look around and they go, okay, we've reached a crisis point where we no longer have anything to lose by talking about more systemic reforms. And maybe at that point you get a consensus that crosses party lines about making changes. And I say in the book, the model for that would be Confederation. That's exactly what happened in Confederation. They got to a point where they could not move forward any further, and then they made the great leap of faith into Confederation.
So we need another leap of faith?
Maybe.
You have given us a lot to think about, as you always do in your columns in the Globe and Mail as well. The Crisis of Canadian Democracy by Andrew Coyne. Andrew, it's great to see you. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks so much.
Onward we go.
Thank you.
Writing about platonic and romantic love, Kyo Lee made history when she became the youngest person to win the CBC Poetry Prize when she was 16. Now at age 18, she's released her first book of poems about the struggles of girlhood, relationships, religion, and culture. The book is called I Cut My Tongue on a Broken Country, and Kyo Lee joins us now for more. Hi.
Hi.
This is such a fantastic collection of poems. The title of this collection is I Cut My Tongue on a Broken Country. The line is so powerful. What does it mean to you?
I Cut My Tongue on a Broken Country is a line from one of my personal favorite poems in the collection, a love poem Between Countries. And that poem is about how we love between countries, as countries, but also people from different countries. And for me, it's first of all about two things. One, about the country itself. For me, when I was writing it, it's about Korea because it is literally broken into North and South Korea. But the reason I like it is that I think it's resonant for a lot of people because all countries are at least a little bit broken. So I think it applies to all countries. In Canada, some people apply it to Canada, and I think that's also absolutely true. And the other part is about translation, in that I cut my tongue part. A lot of the collection is about exploring what is lost in translation, not just the meaning of words, but parts of myself. Where am I lost in translation, and what parts of myself are lost in translation? And I think that was like the physical image of cutting my tongue and things spilling out, right? Like things, myself, my words, my culture, my family, like all of these things spilling out like blood. I've cut my tongue on all of these different broken countries, and what parts of myself have I lost in them, and maybe what parts of myself am I reclaiming or have I gained?
You combine the languages within the book of
Yes.
The collection of poetry. Which language do you think captures you the best, Korean or English?
I think English. Well, at least I feel more comfortable talking about my feelings in English, which is very strange. But
Why is it strange?
Because it's strange for me to think about the fact that I am different people in different languages. That's one of the large topics I talk about in the book, and it's the CBC Poetry Prize winning poem, The Lotus Flower Blooming into Breast. I think that poem also explores that a lot, about how I am different people in different languages. For me, in English, I definitely feel better talking about myself and my feelings, and I don't know if that's just like the language itself, and that like the culture, like the people here are more comfortable talking about their feelings than perhaps they do in Korea. But I think it's also just part of my experiences in either of those languages. But there's definitely parts where I feel like the English language is not enough to capture me, and I think those are the parts that I use Korean in the book.
If my memory serves me correct, in one of the poems, you said that there isn't a Korean word to capture home.
Yes.
I thought that was interesting. So how do you then, because I think, not to put words in your mouth,
Yes.
but it seems as if throughout the collection, this is a place, this is something that you're in exploration of.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted the collection itself to be something like a home, like a safe space. And I have been thinking about that a lot, the fact that there is no word for home in Korean. Actually, I feel like that is the case in many languages. In fact, it's very interesting that English has different words for home and house. And I, find that that's really important, that's really significant. And I don't really know how else my perception of home would be if I didn't have English to guide me. But I think I am even more so recently trying to figure out what is home to me in Korean.
So what is home?
I don't know. I am on my journey of meaning. But I think for me right now, it's pieces of moments, people, the moments of love that I try to find. It's beautiful to me in some way that there is no word to capture all of this, that it's just so much and that it's just incapturable with language, but I'm trying.
I also think sometimes when we are in the process of becoming adults,
Yes.
that we are looking to external people to be there for you.
Yes.
And sometimes when you don't have that, it's really hard to navigate this world because it's big and it's scary. I appreciated that you dedicated this book to yourself.
Yes.
So it feels in a way that you have shown up for yourself each and every time, and perhaps you are home.
Yes. Yeah, that is such a beautiful way to think about it, that maybe I need to find home in myself. Yeah.
You said that in a previous interview that you were able to write this book because of, quote, ignorance.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
There's the director of Citizen Kane, he talks about the reason he was able to direct Citizen Kane is because of ignorance, because he didn't know how hard it was, And I largely feel that, not to compare myself to the director of Citizen Kane, but I feel like I wrote this book because I didn't know how hard it was to write a book. I had to gaslight myself into thinking that it was going to be easy. And it wasn't really, but I think I wouldn't have been able to get started if I knew how hard writing a book was.
And why did you want to write it?
It's very interesting because I started writing in 8th grade after reading Milk and Honey, and I was like, I could probably do this too. And I realized that I couldn't because writing poetry is pretty hard. But I started writing a book from the get-go. Ever since I started writing poetry, I was writing for a book, and I wrote 3 different manuscripts that were really bad, that I dislike, before I ended up with this one, which I am proud of and which I do like. So I feel like I've always been writing poetry with the intention of writing this collection.
Why poetry?
It was inevitable, I think. I started writing at all in 8th grade, and when I started writing, it was poetry, and I don't even know why. I think poetry just comes more easily to me because I can sit down and I can finish a poem in one sitting and I'm done with that poem and I don't really think about that poem anymore. And I feel like it's just like a short little, in that short little time, it can get so much out of me. I can tell so many different stories and I don't have to worry about plot. I don't have to worry about characters.
But some of them have a plot.
Yes, and some of them also have characters, but I don't really think about them in the same way that I think about essays or fiction or short stories, because I do write those as well, and I am hopefully working on a novel. But for those, I feel like I have to think a lot more and I have to research more, but for poetry, it's just more like I can sit down and something will come to me.
You're going to read a poem for us, but before we get to the poem, who are you writing about?
In the collection? I think many different people. At least, a large part of the book is at least semi-autobiographical. And lots of the stories in here are based on true stories, but maybe not completely factually. I will say some true stories are mixed together. In some ways, I'm talking about the true stories of my parents and my grandparents, about my real friends, about, past relationships. And sometimes they are just fiction.
Can you read it from us? For us?
Of course, yes.
So you're going to read a poem for us. It's called "What Does Your Name Mean?" And will you tell us a little bit about the piece before you read?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so my name in Korean is actually, it's Kyo Lee, and then Kyo is like the second part of my name. Like in Korean, it's actually Eungyo, and Kyo is the part that gets translated to Kyo. And for the first year that I was here after immigrating, I went by Eungyo, and then it's too long, and nobody was able to pronounce it.
Did you go by Susan or is that just from the poem? Oh, yeah.
No, I did also a little bit go by Susan at one point, Sarah at one point. I don't know. There were lots of different things. I actually did have an English name planned for myself. It was, I don't know, Julie or something. I don't remember. And I was supposed to go by that after coming to Canada. But then an immigration officer just called me Kyo by chance, and I was like, okay, I'll go with that. So I became Kyo. And it's very strange to think that your name has so much to do with you, right? And the fact that I have changed my name so many different times, when I was young, when I was like 6 or 7, so that I would be more convenient for people. Which
That's interesting words. So you would be
Yeah.
more convenient for people.
Yes, so that people would find me more digestible maybe, and find me like less like hard, just like even beginning with my name.
Because it's the more difficult a name is, the more the other person has to make a better effort.
Yes. And I think I was afraid to maybe take up space, or to take up people's time, or to take up people's effort.
But even just saying that a name is difficult, it's,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes. Yeah. And I think just that fact was really sad, that I didn't I wanted to fit some sort of, I wanted to be something easy, because I didn't want to be different in another way, right?
You wanted to belong.
Yes. Yeah. And when I think about that now, it's sad that I thought about it that way. I like my name now, being Kyo. I wouldn't want another name. I'm proud of it now, but I think it took me some time to get to where I am.
Okay.
What does your name mean? Kyo. Beauty, moonlight, laughter, to teach, to choke, unite in Japanese. To draw a line down your name and watch the gap widen into parallel barricades. Apricot in Japanese. Your taemyeong was apricot because you were so small and sour and spring. The things we end up meaning by accident. To go by Sarah in dressing rooms because you're tired. To answer to pauses, to say your own name like a bullet caught between the teeth. In grace, silver, edge, to growl, to suffer, to be green as grass, to sever pieces of your name like wishbone, to hang in the air like a collapsed promise, as if abandoning a name is all you need to become something new. Lee. Hometown, wound, foreign intruder, a boy resting under an apricot tree. You want to sit down beside him, forget your name, and pick a warm fruit to share. You dream of a world where your name is apricot, 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 a world where 3 wrongs make a right. Sarah. Your pastor tries to baptize you with Dasani and calls you Sarah. You wonder if your God can pronounce your name. Beautiful suffering, silver choking, moonlit end, water song, bird song, apricot, apricot, whatever you want it to.
You are so talented. Thank you so much for doing that for
you.
us. It's great. It's a real privilege to be able to hear it in your own voice. Writing, I think there's this idea throughout history that we talk about poets, that they're very tortured. And I think it's even made more popular right now because of Taylor Swift's latest album. And one of the poems in this collection is titled, "Can You Be a Poet and Be Happy?" As a poet, what is the answer? Does it matter?
I want to say yes. And I would say even just a couple of weeks ago, I would have been able to say yes with a little bit more confidence.
That yes, you are happy, or?
Yes, I am happy. I don't really like the idea that poets are tortured, I guess. I think one of the central ideas that I explore in the poem itself is that, art is not made because of pain, but in spite of pain. But recently I started writing again, and It's strange because writing makes me happier, but it also makes me a little bit miserable because I don't know if it's because I am writing about miserable things, but it puts me in some sort of headspace where I think, I don't know, like the world is against me or something, which I know is like factually not true. And I think after, I was also like maybe a little bit miserable like writing this collection, but I think afterwards it made me much happier because I felt like I worked through a lot of the stuff. And I think for me, poetry is a coping mechanism. And maybe I have to like feel some more things and I have to grapple with difficult things as I'm writing, but afterwards I feel better because I feel like a weight has been lifted off me.
So it's maybe your way of understanding about yourself and your place in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
You write poems that explore the relationship you have with your father and your mother.
Yes.
Was it difficult for you to write about this? And if you don't want to answer, you can tell me to shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those are real stories and some of them are not. But it's very hard for me, I think, to write about them. Yeah, but I don't know.
Then why do it?
Because again, I feel like it was somewhat inevitable. Like I don't sit down thinking, oh, I want to talk about my mother, but it like sometimes comes out because it is at least partly like a coping mechanism. And I think for me, like just again, like a way for me to understand myself and maybe my relationships. Yeah, they feel somewhat necessary for my well-being.
I always read the acknowledgements because I think you get a better understanding of the author. And in the acknowledgements, you thank people who might be upset after reading this and say, you know, thank you for loving me up until this point. And you also say you thank your mom and father for everything that they've done for you. What have the reactions been like from the collection, from the people closest to you?
You know, that's interesting. I feel like the collection has been celebrated, and I've been super grateful for that, just like more broadly. But I think for the people closest to me, it has actually been like pretty subdued. I feel like people are like, oh, I guess you wrote the book. And it's like, oh, it would have been great if you cared. But I actually have grown to kind of like that because, first of all, it keeps me a little bit grounded, I think. And also, I just like the idea that people don't care that much because it's like, oh, they still like see me as Kyo the person instead of Kyo the author. And yeah, like, sometimes I do think, oh, it would be like really wonderful to have like the people closest to me care the most. But then I think, oh, like maybe not. Like it has enforced somewhat of like a work-life balance for me, at least in how I think about myself.
And I think something that everything that I've read about you starts with your age. And I can imagine that can become a little confining. And you're also being placed in the category of queer writing.
Yes.
How do you feel about those labels?
That's interesting. Yeah, like I definitely don't want to be, like a good writer for a young poet or like a good writer, in the category of queer poetry. Like I definitely, I don't know, like sometimes I do not mind the labels because I think, sometimes they're just, again, like inevitable just with like marketing and whatnot. But that is also not particularly how I see myself. Like I don't want to see myself just as a young poet nor just as a queer poet. I think my work has more to offer.
I think too there's this idea that even to write a memoir you have to be a certain age in order to be able to fully understand life. Do you think that's something that, I don't know, maybe the industry needs to work on a little bit because good work is good work no matter the age?
Yes, I think so, definitely. I think in literature it is actually probably better than other industries. I think a lot of my work has been met with just the idea, oh, it is good work, so it doesn't matter how young you are. And I've been, immensely grateful for that people haven't just been like, oh, like, never mind, you're 16. Yeah, and I think especially, like, not even just like disregarding age, but I think we have so much to learn from young writers to get to hear how they experience life and their life from their own voices.
And in the set of, in these poems, you write a lot about girlhood.
Yes.
Now you're on your way to adulthood.
Yes.
Is there a certain, do you feel grief? Do you feel excitement? How are you feeling in that transition?
Yes, I feel recently I've been feeling a little bit of grief. I turned 18 now 2-3 months ago, and it didn't feel very real for me at the start, but now I'm realizing, oh my goodness, I'm legal, I can sign my own documents, and even just in things like that, I'm finding that, oh, like maybe I am a little bit more alone than I was. And I don't mean that in, I don't, that my parents are like suddenly abandoning me now that I'm an adult, but it's just that, oh, like I don't have something to like fall back on as much. I still feel like I do, which, is still keeping me a little bit like a child, but it is very strange to think that I am becoming an adult and that, I don't know, like I definitely don't feel like one.
Well, I mean, I don't think we have those conversations a lot because you're actually going to Yale in the fall.
Yes.
How are you feeling about going away abroad and also going to Yale?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm incredibly excited, but also I think a part of the reason why I've been grieving a lot recently is just I feel like I've been going through a phase of like pre-grief in that I'm already grieving what I will be grieving, right? I'm already grieving the people that I love right now, my family, my friends, and the people that I'll be, leaving behind, or the people I won't get to see as much anymore. Yeah, I feel like I'm pre-grieving my childhood, and I'm trying to acknowledge that, but also try to not let that get in my way of loving people, because I think I have this sort of tendency to, block myself off, to try not to get hurt, right? To love people less so that I won't get hurt as much in the future. But I'm really trying to cut that out, I'm trying to love as much as I can right now, love broadly and really forcefully.
I mean, grief is the price we pay for being able to love. Finally, what do you want people to take away from this collection?
I want people to feel safe while reading it. I hope you find some sort of meaning in it. I like the idea that writing is a collaborative process. I'm always dependent on readers to find their own meanings, right? None of this means anything if you're not willing to take it. So I feel like my part of the work has been done. I'm offering this to you, and do what you will with it.
It's been fantastic having you here. Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on everything. We're going to be rooting for you, whatever you do next. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And that is the agenda for Thursday, May 22nd, 2025. Tomorrow, does the province need to get tougher on drunk drivers? John Michael McGrath and yours truly will explore that question following the awful tragedy that claimed the lives of 3 children in our capital city last weekend. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.